Okay. Can you hear me now? Oh. Did I just speak for 6 minutes and there was no without sound? Oh, that's embarrassing. That is embarrassing. But it's funny because I spent about a minute I spent about a minute talking about how underwhelming the production values of this channel was. The the irony in that um I was wondering why no one was watching the stream. I think I think we have our answer now. Uh okay. That was a bit humbling, but I'm should be accustomed to it by now. Well, welcome. Bottom line, but yeah, 20. That would have been. I don't know if I would have been able to come back from that. Just do this hour long discursive stream. I start exploring topics, and at the end of it, that's happened though. That's happened with much more professionally run channels than mine, believe it or not, where I think John Harris had that issue. For those of you familiar with John Harris, he has this great podcast, Conversations That Matter, which usually takes the form of the format is an hour to an hour and a half long podcast exploring usually um, social justice issues from a Christian perspective. He does apologetics videos looking at looking at um, the incursions that social justice has made into the church. It's actually really fascinating, but I think that happened to him once or twice where he began a video. He had really bad technical issues and then had to restart the video. Yeah, John Harris is great. I think I've stopped watching his podcast just because they're so they're so voluminous. There's just they're so ubiquitous. Like he uploads a podcast. I think he uploads 3 or 4 of them per week now, and they're all over an hour long, which is very time consuming to watch. I think it's fruitful for the most part, but it just it's there's only so many hours in a day. Mine, thankfully, I've kind of I've trimmed my videos. I used to have, particularly when I was doing this series on the Quran. I had these videos that would go on for forever, especially when I was covering the first couple of surahs. It would just go on for over an hour without editing, and I think that's one of the promises. If you go to my channel, you watch completely unedited videos, whether they're live streams or pre-recorded. They're not there not be any chopping. Uh, yeah, that's another thing. You can also speed up. I know a lot of people do that. It's very useful if you need to get through a video very quickly. Anyway, what I was talking about was the Oscars incident and a very interesting take, which I hadn't. It was a perspective I hadn't really thought about, but Kurt Metzger, when he appeared on the Jimmy Dore show, his podcast, he was talking about the Twitter reaction, all of these social justice oddballs and hyper woke people who are essentially encouraging violence and exhorting people to assault comedians who transgressed their bizarre constellation of values, particularly Dave Chappelle, who's become the bête noir of these people for allegedly being a transphobe. Yeah, well, we don't know. we don't know if it was if it was scripted, if it was like the WWE, or if it was semi semi scripted, or if it was completely authentic. That I think that's still yet to be revealed. Uh, but yeah, Metzger was essentially, and interestingly, he was actually a writer. He probably provided the best jokes for Amy Schumer when she had a during her short-lived television show. I had a friend who appeared on her show once to discuss global warming, and they never aired it because he made an intelligent case against for climate change realism. So they de-sixed that episode. But anyway, he used to write for her, and he was talking about all of these bloodthirsty left progressives who hate comedy, and his perspective was really interesting. He and I never heard it explained in this way, but it's very persuasive. His argument that these people essentially don't understand what humor is. They don't grasp the concept of stand-up comedy or comedy in general. They look at it as just a ritualized form of bullying. So someone gets up on stage, they have a captive audience. This is from their point of view. They get up on stage, they have this captive audience, and then they get to abuse and ridicule that audience for if for their own amusement. That's the way they look at comedy. And since it's bullying, the only acceptable form of comedy in their eyes is attacking, and again, this is from their perspective, attacking people who are at the bottom of the progressive stack, but who they consider to be the dominant hierarchy. So attacking white males and heterosexual men and Christians and people they view with scorn. And if you attack people who are at the top of their stack, like for example, in the case of Dave Chappelle, if you make jokes about someone who is quote unquote transgender, someone who is gender dysmorphic, who does not understand what or rejects the sex that they are. If you make jokes about that group of people, and this is all divided according to groups. There's no individualization uh, here. You're all basically divided into these large groups, and if you attack groups that are at the top of their stack in terms of humanity, then you are then you deserve to be driven from the public square and assaulted and demeaned and humiliated, because again, they don't understand the concept of humor, the idea that comedy, it's not about bullying someone. I mean, granted, there's something called insult comedy. There's something that relies very much on very sardonic, caustic wit. But at the end of the day, it's about eliciting laughter. Yes, and sometimes it's also about puncturing, like in the case of Ricky Gervais, just puncturing the pretensions of the audience you're speaking to. And I think that's another reason that these people that's another explanation for their disdain for this type of comedy. The idea that their shibboleths are going to be demolished, this idea that their pretensions are going to be mocked is something that's unfathomable for them. They just can't accept it. The idea that someone would question a man who believes himself to be a woman, you know, and goes out and enters a swim meet and destroys all of the actual women, and then gets up on the podium, looks like a man for all to all intents and purposes, with the exception of curling his hair, basically making no attempt to present himself as a woman, and yet be glorified by all of these woke weirdos. Like the idea that would be mocked or ridiculed is something that sets their teeth on edge. Yeah, the follow-up the follow-up speech is interesting to examine. That in itself is worthy of exploration, because I think it goes back to the the narcissism of these people, the 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 self-satisfaction and moral grandiosity that that these people hold, because they live in this insulated bubble where no one tells them. Everyone they surround themselves with uh fets them and celebrates them and caters to their egos. So the idea that someone would not do that is absolutely revolting. But I think the Metzger's take was very interesting, and I think he hit the nail on the head. This idea that the woke social justice mob, the people who are trying to police comedy. First of all, I think like Patrice O'Neill said, that for these people do not understand comedy. So they really don't have any right to police how comedy is done. If you could imagine if you could imagine someone who has no experience in construction going onto a building site. So this is someone who's uh, never held a T square, who's never carried a 4x4, who's never done anything having to do with construction. Someone like that going into a building site and demanding to have control, have oversight over the construction of that building. Some A situation like that, you would look at it and say this person is insane. They're not they where do they get off arrogating to themselves this where do they where would someone like that get off arrogating to himself this power to oversee something that he or she has no experience in whatsoever? But that's what these people are doing. These are the most humorless. Adam Carolla pointed this out too. The people who are in charge of, and this is why which is probably it's probably a good thing in the long run. But this is why no one watches these television sitcoms or goes to watch these movies any longer, because the people in charge of entertaining you aren't concerned about entertainment. Entertainment is the at the bottom the bottom of the list of things that they need to check off. Um, but yeah, so it That's the situation. Like producer Nate said, these people who are not have no I forget what phrase he used. Something like they have nothing to do with funny, and they're going to presume to be in charge of funny. And he said, let people who are funny be in charge of funny. And if their jokes don't land, if they're not funny, then the consequences are people will not laugh. That's that's the consequences, not being assaulted on national television or being threatened with bodily harm. Yeah, well, that's the thing. It's self-evident to anyone who has any awareness of themselves. But the unfortunate thing is these people don't. That's the main problem. They don't have any self-awareness. Just like the people in Hollywood, the actors. I think that was one of the divides when you saw people's reactions to this. The people who stand-up comics, um, but people who were non-actors and didn't belong to this social justice cult, they understood how how barbaric it is to attack someone for engaging in free speech. And the people who were on the opposite end of the aisle, they looked at this as a victory for social justice, which I'm not sure how a rich uh, I'm not sure how a wealthy actor engaging in a temper tantrum and physically assaulting someone. I'm not sure how that works into the social justice framework, but they managed to wedge it in there somehow. Um, yeah, the that was that was actually one of the funniest scenes in Seinfeld, where I don't know how many of you remember this, but where he was bragging about being a black belt at a local dojo that he had joined, and Elaine and Jerry and the other characters with thought to themselves, "Oh, that's kind of impressive." Kramer is usually known as this weird layabout who's doing all sorts of eccentric things. So I think it's Elaine comes down to the dojo to see him in action, and he's basically beating up children. And there's this montage of him chasing 7 and 8 year olds around the mat, just like picking them up by their legs and karate chopping them. It's one of the funniest. It's one of the funniest scenes in Seinfeld. But that's essentially social justice social justice weirdos look at comedy. They look at it as some gigantic bully imposing their will on a group of uh, helpless gender non-binary Latinx folks. That's pretty much how they view comedy, and unfortunately, they're the ones uh, in charge of designing these. Um, just basically, they've been given the catbird seat when it comes to and like I said, that's why people don't go watch movies or watch television any longer, which in the long run is probably a good thing. Anyway, uh TBOD, Scott, Alejandro, glad that you joined me. Glad that you told me that my that I was essentially mute for the first 6 minutes. I'm grateful that I didn't spend a half hour just mouthing just mouthing words to no one. And I will see you all later.